The Gold Coast is often sold to the world as a paradise of sun-drenched beaches and glittering skylines, a place where the promise of a good life attracts millions. But beneath the neon glow and the tourist veneer lies a shadow world, a brutal ecosystem where territory is measured in street blocks and loyalty is tested by fire. On the evening of October 12, 2020, that shadow world erupted into plain sight, shattering the suburban peace of Pimpama and signaling the start of a conflict that would shake the foundations of Queensland's organised crime networks. It was 6:30 p.m. The sun had begun to dip, casting long shadows over the quiet residential streets. Shane Bowden, a figure well known to law enforcement and the underground alike, steered his black BMW into the driveway of his unit complex. To the casual observer, it was a mundane end to a standard day. Bowden likely had his mind on dinner or his plans for the evening. Completely unaware that his timeline had run out, he was not just driving home. He was driving into a trap that had been set with chilling, military-grade precision. For weeks, unseen eyes had been watching. Members of a rival faction had allegedly been tracking his every turn, utilizing sophisticated GPS technology attached silently to the undercarriage of his vehicle. This was not a crime of passion or a spontaneous roadside dispute. It was a calculated, cold-blooded removal of a high-value target. As the BMW rolled to a stop, the trap snapped shut. The surveillance footage from the complex captured the final, heart-wrenching moments. Two figures, their identities obscured by hoods, emerged from a nearby patch of vacant land where they had been lying in wait. They did not hesitate. Rushing the vehicle before the engine had even been cut, they unleashed a torrent of violence that left no room for survival. The forensic details of the scene paint a picture of overwhelming force. A total of 21 rounds were discharged in rapid succession. 19 of those came from a machine pistol, a weapon capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute, while the final 2 were delivered from a pump-action shotgun. The sheer volume of fire turned the luxury vehicle into a cage of destruction. The victim was found in the driver's seat, the engine still humming, a grim testament to how quickly a life can be extinguished. When investigators arrived, they did not just find a tragedy, they found a message. The discovery of the tracking device confirmed that this was a professional operation, planned by an organization with significant resources, and the intent to send a warning to anyone watching. This was the opening salvo in a turf war between the International Mongols Motorcycle Club and the resurgent Finks. The targeted loss of Shane Bowden was not just the end of one man, it was the match that lit a fuse on a powder keg, threatening to engulf Southeast Queensland in a level of organized chaos that authorities had feared for years. To truly comprehend the intensity of the violence that erupted in that Pimpama driveway, we cannot look solely at the events of 2020. We must rewind the clock 7 years, to a pivotal moment that fundamentally rewrote the rules of the Underworld in Queensland. The year was 2013. The Mongols Motorcycle Club, an organization with deep roots in California, and founded on the discipline of Hispanic military veterans, initiated a maneuver that would send shockwaves through the Australian criminal landscape. They were not just looking for a foothold, they were looking for absolute dominance. In October of that year, a historic deal was struck that changed everything. Facing the pressure of potential legislative bans, the Finks, a locally established and feared group, agreed to a patch as an over. This was not a simple merger of equals, it was effectively a conquest. Estimates suggest that nearly 90% of the Finks membership traded their existing colors for the Mongols' insignia. This massive consolidation created one of the most formidable alliances in the nation's history, instantly swelling the ranks to around 400 members, with chapters stretching from New South Wales all the way to Western Australia. But in the volatile world of organized crime, rapid expansion often comes with a heavy price tag. When the Mongols absorbed the Finks, they did not just inherit territory and clubhouses. They inherited decades of bad blood, outstanding debts, and bitter rivalries. The American-born organization found itself navigating a complex web of Australian feuds that they perhaps did not fully understand. While the Australian Federal Police designated them as an outlaw motorcycle gang (OMCG), the reality on the street was far more dangerous than a government label. They controlled lucrative markets, but they were now surrounded by rivals who viewed this foreign takeover with deep suspicion and hostility. The new order was fragile, and it only took one spark to ignite the friction between the old guard and the new power structure. At the center of this shifting tectonic plate was Shane Bowden. His personal trajectory perfectly mirrored the chaotic nature of this transition. In 2013, Bowden had been part of the massive migration to the Mongols, aligning himself with the new power. However, loyalty in this world is often fluid and unforgiving. He was eventually expelled from the club in bad standing, a designation that carries severe implications within the culture, following an internal altercation involving another member. Rather than fading into obscurity, Bowden made a bold and dangerous choice. He returned to his roots, rejoining the Finks shortly before his ultimate demise. This defection was more than a personal decision. It was interpreted as a political threat. Intelligence reports suggest the Mongols were deeply concerned by Bowden's aggressive recruitment strategies for the Finks, fearing a resurgence of their old rivals under his influence. Authorities theorized that the tragic event in Pimpama was not merely about settling a personal score, but a strategic move to halt the Finks' rebuilding efforts before they could gain momentum. The loss of Shane Bowden was the inevitable collision of past allegiances and present power struggles, a match thrown onto a pile of dry tinder that had been accumulating since the Great Patchover of 2013. The targeted removal of Shane Bowden did not have the silencing effect the perpetrators likely intended. Instead of suppressing the opposition, it sent a tremor through the underworld that fractured the fragile peace of Southeast Queensland. The Finks, though significantly reduced in numbers following the mass defections of 2013, viewed the Pimpama event not as a defeat, but as a direct declaration of open hostilities. They were down, but they were far from out, and their response was swift, calculated, and alarmingly public. The conflict was no longer confined to the shadows of industrial estates or the privacy of remote driveways. It was spilling over into the daily lives of ordinary citizens. The first clear sign that the rules of engagement had changed came on June 5, 2021. In the quiet suburb of Windaroo, a local barbershop became the focal point of this escalating feud. Under the cover of darkness, the business was subjected to a severe fire attack. This was a significant tactical shift. By targeting a civilian-facing business rather than a fortified clubhouse, the factions were signaling that the traditional boundaries of their warfare were dissolving. The message was clear: there was no sanctuary, and any association, no matter how tangential, could result in devastating consequences. If the Windaroo incident was a warning, what happened 2 days later was a public spectacle of chaos. On June 7th, shoppers at the Australia Fair shopping centre in Southport found themselves unwitting spectators to a violent clash. In the middle of the day, surrounded by families and retail workers, members of the opposing groups collided. This was not a clandestine meeting gone wrong. It was a brazen physical confrontation in a high-traffic public space. The audacity of bringing their war into a shopping mall shocked the community and forced law enforcement to acknowledge a terrifying new reality. The safety of the public could no longer be guaranteed merely by avoiding the wrong side of town. Intelligence gathered by police in the wake of these events revealed the grim logic driving this escalation. Investigators uncovered evidence of attack-on-site orders circulating within the chapters located between Logan and the New South Wales border. These directives represent the most extreme setting on the dial of gang warfare. They effectively strip away any requirement for approval or planning before engaging a rival. Under these orders, members were instructed to confront and neutralize their enemies whenever and wherever they were found, regardless of the setting, or who else might be standing nearby. This attack-on-site philosophy turned a massive stretch of southeast Queensland into an active conflict zone. The geographic corridor from Logan to the border, one of the most populous and economically vital regions in the state, was now a chessboard, where the pieces moved with lethal intent. The distinction between a combatant and a bystander was becoming dangerously blurred. For the residents of these suburbs, the fear was no longer abstract. The war was happening at their local barbershops, in their shopping centers, and on their streets. But as the Mongols and Finks tore at each other, exhausting their resources and drawing the full attention of the police, a third player was watching from the sidelines, quietly preparing to capitalize on the chaos. While the Mongols and the Finks were busy exhausting their resources and drawing heat in a cycle of attrition, a formidable shadow was lengthening from the south. The Comancheros, widely regarded as one of the most disciplined and feared organizations in the national underworld, were watching the chaos in Queensland, not with alarm, but with opportunity in mind. They saw a landscape fractured by infighting, and a market ripe for the taking. This was not an impulsive raid. It was a corporate takeover strategy applied to organized crime. The Sydney stronghold was moving north, bringing with it a level of sophistication that the local factions were ill-prepared to counter. The allure of Queensland for the Comancheros was purely strategic. The region offered access to lucrative importation routes through its ports, and a consumer market worth hundreds of millions annually. But rather than launching a costly frontal assault, they employed a more insidious tactic: internal recruitment. They began identifying fractures within existing clubs, offering stability, international connections, and financial incentives to seasoned members who were disillusioned with their current leadership. It was a brain drain of the criminal class, targeting the most experienced operators from rival groups like the Bandidos, and bringing them into the fold. This expansion was significantly accelerated by the spectacular implosion of another giant, the Rebels Motorcycle Club. Once the undisputed heavyweights of the Australian scene, the Rebels were crumbling from within. A bitter internal dispute, described by insiders as a civil war, had broken out, originating in Western Australia but sending shockwaves across the continent to the East Coast. Senior members felt abandoned by their national leadership during previous conflicts, breeding a deep resentment that the Comancheros were all too eager to exploit. The collapse of the Rebels was a pivotal moment. High-profile figures, men with decades of experience and deep networks, began to defect. They traded their patches for the Comanchero insignia, taking their territory and their contacts with them. This mass migration of talent reshaped the power dynamic almost overnight. The Comancheros were not just growing. They were absorbing the strength of their competitors. The violence that the Mongols had used to assert their dominance was ironically paving the way for their most dangerous rival. By weakening the ecosystem, they had created a vacuum that the Comancheros were now filling with terrifying speed. This was not just a new gang entering the fray, it was a changing of the guard. The Comancheros brought with them a reputation forged in history, specifically referencing the infamous clashes of the tarred 1980s, serving as a stark warning to anyone standing in their way. They were positioning themselves not just to participate in the Queensland market, but to monopolize it. As the rebels faded, and the Mongols remained distracted by their feud with the Finks, the Comancheros established a foothold that would prove incredibly difficult to dislodge, setting the stage for a three-way struggle for control that threatened to eclipse everything that had come before. As we move through 2024 and beyond, the battle lines in Southeast Queensland have not just been redrawn, they have been erased and replaced by a fog of uncertainty. The era of visible intimidation of leather vests and roaring convoys announcing presence is rapidly fading. In its place, a new, more insidious form of warfare has emerged. The organizations involved have adapted, evolving into sophisticated criminal enterprises that prioritize anonymity over notoriety. The modern gangster does not stand on a street corner. They operate from within the folds of legitimate society, making them harder to identify, harder to track, and infinitely harder to stop. Law enforcement has responded with unprecedented force. Operation Morpheus, a massive, coordinated national task force, represents the state's answer to this escalating threat. On November 28th, a synchronized strike across Australia and New Zealand saw specialist police execute dozens of search warrants, disrupting the networks that fuel these conflicts. The raids uncovered the true scale of the economy at stake: significant caches of high-powered weaponry, illicit tobacco, and substantial quantities of methamphetamine and cocaine. These seizures confirmed that the violence on the streets is merely a symptom of a much larger disease, a struggle for control over international trafficking routes, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. However, police pressure has forced a tactical evolution that worries experts even more. The grey man approach is now the standard operating procedure. By shedding their colors and closing down visible clubhouses, these groups have effectively gone dark. They utilize encrypted communications and complex networks of associates to conduct business, bypassing the consorting laws that were designed to disrupt them. A former insider noted that, while the laws were meant to break the gangs, they have inadvertently made them more professional. The war is no longer fought by men you can see coming. It is fought by ghosts who blend into the background until the moment they strike. The danger now lies in the unpredictability. With the Mongols defending their territory, the Comancheros expanding with ruthless efficiency, and the remnants of the Finks and rebels seeking restitution, the potential for a catastrophic event is higher than ever. The geographic scope of attack on site orders means that a chance encounter in a gym, a restaurant, or a traffic jam could trigger a violent response with zero warning. The weapons are no longer crude tools of intimidation, but military-grade hardware, and the willingness to use them in public spaces has been proven. Southeast Queensland currently sits in a deceptive lull, the proverbial calm before the storm. The major players are positioning their pieces, securing their supply lines, and waiting for the inevitable spark. This is not just a local turf war anymore. It is a grinding campaign of attrition, involving international syndicates and deep pockets. The thunder that started in a Pimpama driveway in 2020 has not rolled away. It has simply grown quieter, deeper, and more ominous. The storm is not coming. For those paying attention, it is already here, and the next chapter promises to be the most volatile yet.